My name's Adam McLaughlin, and this is the Church Marketing Ideas Podcast. Practical ideas to help your church build trust in your community. Welcome to the Church Marketing Ideas Podcast, episode 9. Today you can track down all of the show notes of my interview with Brady Shearer at churchmarketingideas.com/009. Now, one thing that you can do to help spread the word about church marketing ideas in our podcast is to leave a review wherever you track down podcasts. So for most people, that's iTunes. Leave a review on iTunes or the Google Play Store or Stitcher or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Leave us a review. That helps more people find us when they're looking for ideas to help their church build trust in their community. So at the end of every episode, we do a question and an answer. And today's question and answer is about a church who's starting to put videos on YouTube, and they want to figure out how do they maximize the keywords that they're using on YouTube. So that question and answer is going to come at the end of the podcast today. But first, my interview with Brady Shearer. He's the CEO of Pro Church Tools and the creator of Nucleus. He loves helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years. After a word from our sponsors, my interview with Brady Shearer. Hey, Tyler, just tell us a little bit about what the Engage Conference is all about.
So the Engage Conference is an online, completely free conference that we put together to help church leaders navigate the technology that is so necessary in today's world. But what we're finding is so many churches just lack the resources, the time, the energy, the money to be able to navigate all of the technology that's just so imperative for us to be able to reach people. And so we've brought some of the best minds in the church space and the technology space all coming together so that we can focus right around how do you implement technology inside the church so that you can reach more people in your community.
Perfect. Our listeners can sign up for free to the Engage Conference at churchmarketingideas.com/engage. Thanks, Tyler. Brady, thank you so much for hanging out on the podcast with me today.
Great to be here, Adam. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to be talking about 5 mistakes that churches are making, or communication mistakes that people just need to have a shift with their mindset. You know, one of the things we chatted about before is I love how you have a way of flipping tables politely. And so I'm excited to
the Canadian way.
Yeah, the Canadian way. Exactly. Kind of excited to get your take on some of these ideas. And the first one is that a lot of churches are using social to promote ministry instead of using social to do ministry. So what are you seeing there, and how can we shift that perspective?
Yeah, the first 3 mistakes that I had written down in preparation for this conversation had to do with social. And the reason being is that social is, of all the digital endeavors churches find themselves invested in, social is one that almost every church has, similar to a website. But where websites have software, templates, WordPress, Nucleus, Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, whatever, where existing professionals have created frameworks for churches, social is kind of like this free-for-all. And churches know they have to do it, but the person that gets thrust into that role is maybe the worship pastor or the youth pastor or the lead pastor who's the only person who's paid on staff. And social media is incredibly difficult. Like, I saw a tweet that was describing social several months ago, and it was like, here's what social is not: copywriting, graphic design, videography, communications, PR, and it went on and on. And it was like, social is not any one of these things. It is all of them. And social media is just incredibly difficult. And unfortunately, the people in our churches that are in charge of it are people that are not formally trained in that. And so we see a lot of missteps in that realm, which is unfortunate because of how much time we all spend on social. There's so much opportunity there. For instance, we're not going to talk about this platform in particular, I don't think, but one of my friends, Alex Wilson, joined TikTok in the last few months. And at the time of this recording, he's got more than 500,000 followers.
Wow.
And before moving over to TikTok, he was kind of struggling to break through with his Christian content on YouTube and on Instagram. And that's a person I know. It's just a friend of mine. That's a real like life story of someone who didn't have any following, not a big name, and went to a social platform that was new and kind of on the rise and has been able to craft amazing attention and share the message of Jesus, that timeless message, through a timely medium. So the opportunity is there, which is why it's sad when these missteps take place. That preamble all to say, the biggest philosophical change that churches can make to put themselves in a position to succeed on social, with the goal, of course, being to take the message of Jesus and to use these timely mediums to share that timeless message, is to see social media as any other ministry within your church. So think of it like the small groups ministry. Think of it like your kids ministry or your youth ministry. What happens in all of those ministries? People attend them, people are involved in them, and ministry happens directly within those times beyond Sunday morning. What you don't do is get everyone together for small groups and then say, we're going to invite you to Sunday. Right. We're already here. We came all the way to Karen's house. What do we look at the spread she put out? Like, we're having a good time. What if we have some ministry here? No. You're invited Sunday. That would be incredibly weird. And yet that's how we use social. We promote our in-person events and services. We promote ministry. We don't do ministry on social. And the prerequisite, Adam, to doing any type of ministry is, of course, attention. Because if you don't have someone's attention, you can't share any message that you have with them. That's why we gather in person. That's why we've done it for so long. We all gather together and fix our attention on God and on the Sunday morning programming, what we're all doing together. The great thing about attention is that it already exists in a huge way on social. And attention is very, very hard to get. Rather than trying to siphon it for yourself, the best thing to do is to go where it already exists. Right. And that's what social allows for us. Go where the attention exists and then use that for ministry. Don't invite people to prayer night. Encourage them to pray right on social. We do that with all of the programming we create for social platforms. Instead of talking about how a conversation is going to happen, ask a question, get conversation going on social, which will then lead to direct messages where like real serious pastoral ministry can take place. And that small philosophical shift can be extremely powerful. One final tip on this, Adam, is that we did kind of an inventory looking at some of the churches and ministry leaders that are doing social the best, at least in our opinion. And we found that they never promoted in-person events or services beyond 20% of the time on social. Wow. So we created this 1 in 5 rule based on those observations. At the very most, only 1 out of every 5 posts should be promotional in nature. And beyond that, we should be using social for ministry.
So I love that this is an important shift, because social is not to promote ministry, but instead social media is a way to do ministry, because it's where people are. It's where attention already exists. And I love your analogy of Karen's home small group, right? You wouldn't show up and then say, hey, by the way, it's time to come on Sunday. That's really important. And I also love that you talk about the 1 in 5 rule, which is a model that's presented by big churches. But I also think that, and you mentioned this as your next talking point, is that modeling social after big churches might need to be a shift that we consider. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So the way that we see most big influential churches, and that's probably the more particular term here, an influential church versus a big church, because you can be a big church in your region that doesn't have a nationwide, countrywide, worldwide influence. But what we found is that churches with significant influences, nationwide, continent-wide, worldwide, they have a very different paradigm that they exist in versus the average church that doesn't have that same worldwide influential. So really, it's not necessarily big versus small. It's more local versus global. And so if you have a Life Church with a Craig Rochelle, or an Elevation with a Furtick, or even, more younger upstart churches that aren't necessarily as big as some others, like VU in Miami with Rich Wilkerson, or Zoe in California with Chad Veach, newer churches, only maybe 5 years old, but they have such huge global influences when it comes to their senior leadership and then also their church. In those instances, the paradigm they exist in is almost in no way sharing in what the paradigm most churches exist in. And so if you are looking up to a Mike Todd at Transformation and you're trying to model your social after that, you're going to find yourself in a tough position, because what is one of the primary recommendations you'll hear from so many people on social media? Here's a very specific example. What you want to do is ask questions and create a conversation. You know, a couple of summers ago, Zuckerberg went on a worldwide tour thinking about the future of Facebook. And this is where groups became such an important part of that platform, because he wanted to have this conversational nature become part of the core fabric of Facebook. Well, if you are a pastor or a church who has a worldwide influence, you don't have any need to have two-way conversation necessarily. Mm-hmm. And you'll see this with the content that's produced. I can't remember the last time I saw a massive church or a very influential pastor ask a question on social. One, because logistically it'd be impossible to answer all of the questions, and sure, you wouldn't be able to create threads that people could scroll through and even read through, much less interact. But it's also just not necessary, because people aren't following those pastors to have a conversation. They're just following them for the celebrity factor. And that's not necessarily me saying celebrity pastor is a bad thing. What I am saying, though, is that your church doesn't have that type of influence. Not a bad thing either. I would much prefer to have conversation on social. So the problem, again, leads back to what I started off with. We don't have people that are formally trained in social, or that are even doing it that often. And so what do? We look at the churches that we idolize, that we look up to, that we aspire to be, and we say, okay, if they're doing this, we can do this as well. But when those two ministries are operating in very different paradigms, that just creates more harm than help.
Yeah, it's like a local coffee shop trying to run systems the way Starbucks does. And, there's definitely a different dynamic, and not to say that one can't eventually lead to the other. I hope there are many, many more churches in an influential space over the coming years, right? I hope that number is always growing and always creating more influence in the world around us. But I get that that's an important thing, to not just assume that because they're doing it means that it works for our context.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be tough, because if we're not looking to these very influential churches, who are we looking to be inspired? And so let me just offer a very, very easy alternative. We have been finding great success with the hundreds of churches that we work with when it comes to social, having these churches simply ask questions on social. And you have to ask the right type of questions. You Sure. don't want them to be controversial, avoid politics, avoid things that are, hotly debated when it comes to theology. But you also don't want the questions to be too ambiguous or bland. So we've found great success in faux controversial questions, pseudo controversy, where you'll ask something like, what is the one thing you don't want on your hamburger? And it's very specific in nature, just one thing. What is the one thing you don't want on your hamburger? And that's when people jump in and they're like, if it's me, I'm like, I just don't want pickles on my burger. I like pickles, but I don't want them in that place. And then someone else puts in, I despise onions. Tristan, one of the employees at Pro Church Tools, hates onions, does not want them anywhere near his burger. And what's great about a question like this is that the barrier to entry to respond and engage is basically nothing, because there's no consequence of telling people that I don't care for pickles on my hamburger. At the same point, the question is pretty irresistible in the way that it's framed, because you want people to know your pseudo-controversial idea. Like, there are entire industries dedicated to talking about, all day I listen to podcasts that talk about the intricacies of basketball. Not necessarily even like the play-by-play, not necessarily strategy, mostly just like arguing about, who's the best player? Like, who's going to be the rookie of the year? It's just fun commentary. And this is taking that same idea that has funded ESPN for, let's say, 2 decades, and applying it to social media, asking questions. And this does a number of positive things. One, it gets people involved and engaged on your social platforms, which is the entire point of it. You want to have conversation. You want to have real conversations. What happens when that happens? Well, the algorithms take notice and they realize this page is engaged. You know what? The next time they publish something, let's show it to more people, because they are doing something that we want to have happen on our platform. So let's give them more reach so more people will do what we want them to do when they're spending time on Facebook. And then 3, this is one that very few people will recognize. Those conversations that start on Facebook, carry over into the lobby on Sunday morning, and they create opportunities for conversations to begin where they wouldn't otherwise. One of the most beautiful things about church is that it is meant to be multi-generational. It's meant to be it doesn't exist within the social structures, the class structures that society exists in. I can show up on a Sunday and I can talk with someone who has a very different salary than me, that lives in a different home in a different area of town, and maybe they don't have kids and they're not married. I have kids and I am married, and they are a different type of job, and they're 40 years older than me or 15 years younger than me, and we can still come around the same table and confess the same faith. But a lot of the times it's hard to you can look across at someone and you're like, I think I know their name, but I've never spoken to them before. Well, what we found happening, and we've heard so many testimonials from churches, is you ask a fun question like this and people will respond. And then I'll go up to Tristan on Sunday. Maybe I've never spoken to Tristan, but so what's the deal with onions? And I have been wanting to talk with him for a while. Let's say I always see him. I always give him a polite nod. We shake hands. But now I have something to actually start talking with him about. And we have this shared experience that started on social that is now carried over to the lobby. And there are so many different ways to frame these questions. They can be non-spiritual, like the hamburger one. Another great one is just name a worship song that has been incredibly meaningful to you over the last year. And then a ton of people are, oh, you know what? I've been listening to this one. I've been listening to this one. You can then create a playlist of all the responses that you get. And now your playlist is not the ones that the senior leadership has chosen. It's the one that the churches have chosen. Right. And you can use social for ministry in all these different ways. And hopefully, even what I'm saying right now is sparking ideas in your mind for how to use it. If nothing else, if you haven't done it yet, take this week, ask those 2 questions on social. You can just use the text creation tool in Facebook. You don't need to create a graphic. You can use the question sticker on Instagram stories if you're asking your youth, or if you're a church that skews a bit younger. Just see where it takes you.
Yeah, it's incredible that you point that out, because I had never really put 2 and 2 together for myself personally. But now that you say that, I can remember starting conversations with people I've seen in passing and starting conversations with them based on something I saw them comment on social media. And so I definitely see that happening, and I see that working. And I think that's a huge shift that we have been missing. But create questions. And one of the things that I saw as a church recently, Canadian church, by the way, they used in-service questions, but instead of using a text number or instead of handing around the microphone, they did it through Instagram stories. So they took a minute to have their people pull up their Instagram story, type in the question, then they answered the questions live. So they were still in the room interacting with each other, but they did it through a medium like Instagram stories. And then after service was done that day and even into Monday, they got more and more questions from people in the community because Instagram had created this, this organic reach. And so I think it is interesting to see how social media and real life interact. They're not just their own pieces of the puzzle. And the next thing that you mentioned is talking about stopping the scroll versus consistent branding. And so I think too often we try and make everything look the same with the same color palette or the same ideas. What have you found about the difference between or working on stopping the scroll versus creating consistent branding?
Okay, so this is the third big mistake that I see churches making. This will be the last one we do on social. Then we'll head into some other digital arenas. But in the recommended post I just shared, I said, look, just go into Facebook, use one of their pre-made backgrounds, and just use the type tool and post it. And maybe someone heard that and it went through their mind like, well, that wouldn't have my church's logo or our colors or fonts necessarily. And we're trying to create a consistent brand aesthetic. And from a creative, as I would consider myself to be, even if it's just marginally, I understand the desire there. And there is a history on social of the perfectly curated Instagram feed and making sure that all the aesthetics line up and consistency is the highest aim. But to go back to our goal on social, the goal on social is what? To have a consistent aesthetic. No, that's not the goal. The goal is to gain attention, because without attention, we cannot share our message. So the most important, most valuable commodity your church can possess on social is attention. And what we found is that a consistent brand aesthetic is actually working against you when it comes to earning attention. The phrase that we always use is stop the scroll. So on social, to gain attention, the first thing you got to do is stop people from scrolling. We all know that behavior. We pull our phone out of our pocket. We start opening it. go to Facebook, we go to Twitter, we go to the gram, and we just start mindlessly scrolling. And what stops it? Something has to be different enough, against the grain enough, zigging when everything else is zagging enough for us to stop. And if you are posting the exact same aesthetic, the same curated feed, the branding that is on point over and over and over again, what you're going to do is actually condition people to ignore the content that you're posting, because subconsciously they will recognize it based on the actual colors and the grid and the creative design that is being picked up subconsciously, and they'll intuitively just, oh yeah, I've already seen that before, I just keep going. We say on social, repeat equals defeat when it comes to the design. Not to say you can't ask questions repeatedly, right, assuming they're different questions, but when it comes to the design, repeat equals defeat. You want to stop the scroll. And we've seen this with the rise of brutalist design, which, Kanye really made mainstream, not with Jesus is King, but with The Life of Pablo, his last full-length LP in 2016. And we've seen it with Hillsong, this type of design that is almost purposefully unattractive. And Gen Z has really picked up on it. It's interesting because we've seen this with aesthetic when it comes to clothing in the past. We've seen certain fashion trends rise up that were originally intended as subtle subversion against culture. So this is the way everyone wants it to be. Oh, everyone's supposed to be nice and well fit. We're going to wear the baggiest clothes we can. And that's what ushered in the 2000s clothing that was super, super baggy. And we're starting to see something similar, not with a fashion aesthetic, but with design aesthetic. And because Gen Z and younger millennials grew up on social, and so every single one of us was creating content, digital content, graphic design, the reason that we're creating this ugly design almost intentionally is a subversion, a pushback on the perfect curated corporate look, quote unquote. This is just rebellion by Gen Z in the form of graphic design, which is fascinating if you think about it, just understanding how that's happening in culture. But now that you understand it, if you're going to have everything perfectly curated and looking as sharp as it can be, you're going to sacrifice attention. And in my mind, the end goal is leading people to life change and having them take next steps towards Jesus. And both of those things require attention. Doesn't matter how amazing your message is. If you don't have attention, you could be talking about the existential matters we deal with in church, eternity in Christ. You could be peddling a discounted oil change. It doesn't really matter. If you don't have attention, neither of those messages can be heard. And so you have to have attention as the prerequisite. So I am very willing, as a creative, to sacrifice my beautiful style guide on social for the sake of earning attention. And of course, you can do a lot of things to earn attention that are not good. You know what earns attention? The person that streaks at a soccer game. And that's not the right type of attention. That's not sustainable. That's not long-term. And it's also not healthy whatsoever for anyone involved. So, posting your pastor shirtless might get attention. It's probably not the type that you want, but sacrificing your perfect fonts for one that's a little bit weirder, sacrificing your curated design for something that's a little bit more bizarre to earn that attention, now that I am okay with.
Yeah. So give me some practical hands-on examples, because I'm thinking that somebody may be listening and saying, okay, I've got a design style and it's easy to plug my stuff into that. But if we need to be changing up our design style all the time, do I need to be reinventing and recreating templates and recreating design styles? But one of the things that I've seen on your Instagram quite often is like a screenshot of a tweet. And so what other ideas can we use that will speed us up, but give us a lot of variety in the style of what we're posting?
Yeah, great question. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to design every single time that you want to post. One philosophy that you can lean on is familiar design in unfamiliar places. And you just hit on this with a screenshotted tweet. So I will publish something on Twitter, and I'll use it kind of as a testing ground, because if a tweet gets published and disappears into the ether without much engagement, hey, whatever, it's Twitter. Right. If one gains some traction, people are engaging with it. It's almost like I'm realizing, okay, this was a great test. People like this. Let's now repurpose it elsewhere. I'll take a screenshot directly on my phone of that tweet, open up Instagram, and publish the screenshot of that tweet on Instagram, and do it on Facebook as well. How does this work when it comes to stopping the scroll? You're going through your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, and suddenly you see a tweet. And subconsciously, you're like, why is Twitter on Instagram? How did Twitter get into Facebook? And
Right.
you're not thinking about that, but it does just enough to stop your scroll because it's a familiar design. So you recognize it, but you're like, this is not where it's meant to be. And we've done this a ton, not just with different social platforms, but we've done this with Windows interface graphics. We've done this with Microsoft Word graphics. We've done this with Spotify. We've done this with Netflix. We've done this with any type of design elements that are familiar. We've done this with a ton on Apple. So you'll take like an iMessages discussion and you'll design it into like a Bible verse and you'll publish it. Like, well, why is there a Bible verse inside of iMessage? Well, now you just read the Bible. Gotcha. And it doesn't have to be like so, gimmicky like that. But a lot of the times to gain attention, you can do something that's a little bit on the nose. And I'm okay with that because once you have attention, again, then you can share the message. And that's all that matters to me. Effectiveness, doing social in the way that it's meant to be done.
So I hear kind of this model that a lot of us had adopted that was focused on what we wanted as the curator of the content. And that's like, we wanted the design and we wanted the perfect look and we wanted our 9 Windows and Instagram to line up in a larger version of the image.
Nice.
But what I hear you saying is what we need to reconsider is what is the actual goal and what is the user looking for? What do they want and how can we serve them?
Absolutely. And we see this across church everywhere. This isn't a social phenomenon. This problem doesn't only exist on Facebook. We're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years. And one of the unfortunate side effects of that is church attendance is declining. And so we have to kind of recalibrate, not just on social, but church-wide. Is what we're doing, spending money, time, and creative energy on, is it actually helping us to accomplish our church's mission? Because for the longest time, church attendance served as the ideal indicator of whether or not our churches were succeeding in their mission. And maybe we'd feel uncomfortable saying that explicitly. We probably wouldn't want to be like, that's all that matters. And yet that would be the primary metric that our churches are tracking. Why? Well, because the only way we could gain people's attention was to get them to gather in person, all for an hour or two on a Sunday or a Saturday or whenever. And then we could tell them about Jesus. We could help them learn more about the Bible, and we could worship together as a church body. Well, now, with the advent of digital platforms, we don't just need that 1 hour. We can reach people in the other 167 hours that happen out of a 168-hour week every single week. And yet, we're still using church attendance as the ideal indicator, that main metric that is going to tell us if what our church is doing is correct or not. And the problem with church attendance is that it is really a bad metric when you want to get a holistic picture of your church's community. I mean, consider that church attendance can't tell you if the people in your church have become more like Christ in the last year at all. All it can tell you is if there are more or less in the seats than there were the year before. And if church attendance is declining globally, you're kind of fighting against the tide. You're not necessarily going to be able to stop that. And even though that's happening, the good news is that the world's desire for faith and purpose and hope and community and everything that our church is meant to exist to do, those desires are at a higher pace than they've been in a very long time. So even though attendance is declining, the search for faith is not. In fact, based on the isolation so many of us are feeling because of digital, the desire for that is almost higher than it's ever been. And so we need to recalibrate. And so our recommendation is always to focus on next steps that are happening in your church, because next steps are what contribute to life change. We don't want passive spectators in our church. We want active participants. We don't want people sitting on the sidelines. We want them to get involved and attend a service. Yeah, that's one type of next step, but it's just one. We also want people serving and giving and praying and meeting up in community and volunteering and engaging with our content online. And there are so many different next steps, usually at least 17 for every single church when it comes to our calculation.
Right.
And social is meant to contribute to those next steps taking place. And it's meant to be a vital part of your ministry as a whole that's contributing to next steps. And so I know I got a little bit off track there, but we're trying to introduce this new paradigm to churches and say there's nothing wrong with tracking church attendance, but if that's all you're tracking, if that's what you're leaning on the most, you're never going to get an accurate picture of where your church is going, the overall health and the overall growth trajectory, whether that be up or down, and focusing on next steps, every single one of them. Maybe there's 17, maybe there's 18, and you weight them all differently because someone responding to an email is going to be a lot less valuable than someone being baptized, let's say, or taking communion. But each of those represent a next step of people moving a bit closer to Jesus, whether they're in your church now or outside of your church attending for the first time.
So those three, the first three steps are all about social media. And then we're going to move on. Number 4, and I'm going to let you introduce this. I'm not even going to try and segue this one because for whatever reason, this happens to be a very controversial deal. So what's number 4?
Church mobile applications, church apps.
Brady said it, not me.
So
okay.
I've been very vocal against church apps for the last 4 years, at least at this point. And there are a number of reasons why when it comes to the data we have available to us on the adoption rates of apps. The 80% of people that ever download your app, they're never going to become active users. So if you do have an app or you're speaking with an app builder and they're like, look at how many people are going to download your app. Well, just know like 4 to 5 of those people will never become active users of an app. More than 50% of the apps in the Google Play Store have been downloaded a grand total of 0 times. I don't want to talk about all that. I've spoken about that before. I want to talk about something a little bit differently.
Sure.
And that is that in all of my experience working with churches, the biggest complaint or the biggest point of lack that I hear is, well, we just don't have that much time and we don't have that much money. And this is why church apps and the idea of a church app can be so sinister, Adam, because we know, as we've been talking about on social, but this also extends to web and graphic design and video production and all areas of digital. All of our churches are trying the very best they can with what they have, and what they have is not that much because we didn't grow up, the vast majority of pastors, with this new paradigm of digital. And we have maybe one paid staff member or a couple paid staff, but we're doing digital on the side. No one is a full-time social media pastor unless you are in a very unique role.
Right.
And so what happens is we get this idea, a church app. It's the missing piece to the puzzle. All the big people have church apps. Wow. You could search the App Store and our church would show up there. You know who has an app? Disney Plus. Apple Plus, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Netflix. We could be right there. We could be next to Netflix on the App Store. And this is an extremely enticing idea because if you don't have a strong grasp on digital strategy, it can seem like that all-in-one solution that's going to solve all of the digital problems that exist. What makes it so sinister is that knowing that most of our churches are short on time and money, we now have to pay for and maintain a duplicate platform that can do almost nothing different than our website can do. Not only that, but it's only useful on mobile applications. It's not discoverable in organic search engines. And so it can't even do the things that a website is meant to do best. It's like the home I'm in right now. I'm in my home office if you're watching the video version. We moved into this home, my family and I, last year. So we've been here for about a year now. It's like if I went to my family and I said, there's a new home down the street that's for sale. And because they're still building a bunch of new ones on this avenue, Adam. And I say, we're going to buy that new home. We're going to stay and keep the home we already have. And you might be thinking, well, couldn't we just build an addition onto this current home? We could. And you might be asking, are we going to move into that other home? No, but we could go back and forth. You might be thinking, is there anything new this other home can do that your current one can't? Functionally, no, but it looks a bit different and it's kind of cool to own both. Yes, we have to pay to maintain both. Yes, we have to pay to furnish both. Yes, there are ongoing monthly costs, but this is the solution that our family needs. And I don't want this to sound like condescending to churches because I know that we're all doing the best we can with what we have. And if I took my vehicle to a mechanic and they looked in the internals and I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know how to fix it. And they said, Brady, we see the problem. Your Harrison buckler is out of alignment. I would just believe them because I don't know anything about vehicles. And they would say, if we're going to have to send out for the part, we're going to have to build, but once it's done, This is going to be the improvement that you and your vehicle need. I would probably just believe them because they know what they're talking about and I do not. And that is the situation our churches are in. We're falling for this idea of the church app. And of course, there are fringe cases. Of course, there are individual churches that would benefit from an app. But I have been working with tens of thousands of churches now for the last 8 years. And in my opinion, in my experience, 99% of our churches, an app will be more harmful than helpful. It will be a net negative overall when you consider the cost, the maintenance, the upkeep, not even to mention the split attention. Because if you are offering signups, giving, people watching your sermons on your app, you're going to need to do all of those things on your website as well, because people are going to go to your website looking for those. So now you've got these two different platforms. By the way, they don't talk to each other.
Right.
If we go fast forward, Adam, I'll say this, like in 2 to 3 years, and you can get a church app that like is part of your website that pulls from the same database and everything's talking together, I don't think I'd have a problem with apps anymore. But they don't exist in that way because you're not building a custom app. You're using one of these pre-made templates and they have their own database and your website has its own database. So what happens when someone signs up for baptism on your website, but then also signs up for baptism on your app? Well, firstly, you had to build 2 different forms. Because when someone went to your website, you didn't want to get a phone call or a text message or a Facebook that said, hey, where do I sign up for baptisms? And then you on a Saturday night have to go and say, okay, go to the app. Here's the link to download it. No, so you made 2 different forms. And now you have 2 different sign-up databases. And now you've got to figure out, okay, we got to combine them later, like in an Excel spreadsheet. Like there are so many problems that this can all come about for the sliver of hope that the app is going to be the solution to our digital problems. No, 99% of the time. More harmful than helpful.
Yes. That's a big pill to swallow for some people because
no, it's not. You just save $200 a month. Yay! Saving money and time.
Yeah, it's this yes, I know, and I haven't quite figured out why it is such a thing, but the facts are there. The facts exist. So the last thing, the fifth thing, the misstep that want to talk about with churches is their email newsletter. So dig into that a little bit for me, and then we're going to recap the whole thing.
For sure. So email newsletters, very important part of our digital communication, because email, even though it seems archaic, is still the best way to communicate with your audience. And you might be thinking, well, that's because most churches are filled with people that skew a bit older in the demographic. No, for my company, Pro Church Tools, which is vastly people my age, because people that are my age resonate more with what I say overall, email is the best way to communicate with them. And we've been investing in building our email list since day one. It's more important than Instagram. It's more important than Facebook. It's more important than Twitter. I think combined, all 3, I would still say email is more important. Churches generally do email poorly. We try to take every single possible promotion and stick it into one weekly newsletter. So here are a few quick tips. We've spoken a lot. I've yelled a lot. I'll give you a few quick tips on your email newsletter. Firstly, you want to have a single call to action in your email newsletter. This is general communication philosophy. The more options people have, the less likely they are to do anything. All right? So in an email, you want to send a single thing. Now, you can have multiple links in your email, but they should all lead to the same thing. So you can say it differently to try to speak to 2 different audiences or to people that will resonate differently with different communication techniques, but both should lead to the same email. So if you're going to send an email that is getting people to sign up for Operation Christmas Child, which just happened, if you're sending out that email because you know it's like one of your church's biggest pushes of the year, you can send that email out. The great thing is that's going to apply to most of the people in your church. And don't dilute the email by also including the men's ministry, the women's ministry, the youth ministry, the worship night that you have coming up. You will see less responses when you include everything. It's hard to kind of pare things down.
Right.
And I've heard people respond to this and say, won't I just come off lazy if I'm only including one thing? To which I always respond. One of my favorite quotes, it's Mark Twain. He says, I sat down to write a short letter, but I didn't have time. So I wrote a long one instead. The idea that somehow being clear and concise is lazy communication, is the exact antithesis of what's actually happening. And it's actually disrespectful in my mind to our churches when we just throw every single thing we possibly could at them and then expect them to cipher through what we're telling them. You know, one of the common complaints for is like, people will come up to a church and be like, I didn't hear about that. How did I miss this event? Like, I told you, I sent it to the bulletin. I put it on Facebook. I put it here. Well, you've just been putting everything everywhere and expecting people to somehow weed through this chaos.
Right.
And this is why we always point back to another communication philosophy that you kind of need to make any of these work, which is the central hub. There needs to be a single destination where every single thing in your church is happening. Every single next step is available. The best place to do that is with your website because it's available 24/7, not just on Sundays. It works on every single device, so it's accessible to everyone. And a great thing about a website is it can capture information, store it, and distribute it to the people that need to get it. So if you are having a problem at all with that complaint, I didn't see it happening, I didn't know it was happening, you need to start taking the onus off of you, the communicator, the church, and putting the onus on your congregation. They're adults. They can figure things out. Here's an analogy we often use. So we're both Canadian, Adam.
Right.
The Canadian theater of choice is called Cineplex. It's the most popular. So go to see a movie at Cineplex. What do? I go to the theater and I wait until the previews to see the showtimes. No, that's obscene. I would never do that. That's incredibly inconvenient. I call Cineplex and ask them for the showtimes. No, this is not 1995. Right. Don't do that. I go to the website to see the showtimes. I can find out which one will work for me, and then I can take a next step and get my tickets, sign up essentially to go to that movie directly there. I then don't go to the person that's checking the tickets and be like, I didn't know this movie was happening. Why didn't you tell me? Like, what do you mean tell you? We have a website. You're a grown-up. Go find that information yourself.
Right.
And this might sound harsh to your congregation, but you're actually doing a disservice to them when you don't make things available to them all in one place, every time, all the time. That's the reason why people are looking in emails, trying to just find all of the information they need through the chaos. Have a central hub where every single destination or every single next step is available in one spot. And then with your emails, send out the most important thing in one email, have one of those next steps highlighted, which will then result in more people taking a next step, which is great. Would you rather have, for instance, one person sign up for the men's ministry, one person sign up for the women's ministry, one for the fall retreat, and 2 for the Operation Christmas Child? Or would you rather have 35 people sign up for Operation Christmas Child?
Right.
Because those are the real results we see when we teach churches this, and then they use it because they get back to us. Because we have a big audience, and we only keep teaching things that we know work. Like, this isn't hypothetical. This isn't like the ideas that we've come up with. This is the real stuff that works, and we got the receipts from the churches that are seeing it work for them. And when more next steps happen, that leads to more life change for the people in your church that are helping people across the world by sending shoeboxes, but it's also helping them because they're being the church. They're not just sitting on the sidelines and being passive spectators. They are getting involved. They're getting their hands dirty. They're doing what church is meant to do. Another easy tip with your emails, remove the graphics. Remove the fancy formatting. Just send plain text. Why? Because it looks like an email you'd get from a friend. If I'm sending Adam an email, I'm going to send him an email that's plain text. I'm not going to put in a graphic. I'm going to put like a beautiful banner that says my email to Adam. He's like, what is this? This is incredibly bizarre. Church is meant to be a family. It's supposed to feel like community. Don't feel like you need to over-design. And again, that should come as good news because it will work better and it's less work for you.
Takes less time. So Brady, you offer a service called Nucleus to help create a central hub for churches. Tell us a little bit about some of the results that you've seen in giving a single call to action, a single hub for communications people or for pastors or for whoever's available to point their church members to.
Sure. So you've heard me say it several times in this conversation. Next steps, the most important thing that can happen in your church. And so with that new paradigm comes the need for new tools. And so we built this platform called Nucleus on top of this paradigm of next steps. It's the first platform to ever be built with this in mind. And it's a church website builder. It has a social media aspect. It has a sermon engine to host all of your church's messages directly on your website rather than sending all the traffic to YouTube. It's got a stock footage element where you can download clips to create videos and create content within your church. And every single part of the application works to get people to take more next steps. And that's the way we judge the success of the platform. So you asked for results. we started this church, we started this platform, and people came to us like, we started using Nucleus, and our engagement is up 53% from the last year. That's from a church called Forefront Church, from their lead pastor. And he's like, the only thing different is Nucleus.
Wow.
Because simply by pointing people to one destination every single time, not check the bulletin, call the church, talk to a pastor, email the ministry staff, download the app, go to the website, check out the lobby. That sounds comical. I've been doing church announcements for 10 years. That is the way we promote our stuff. It's incredibly chaotic and confusing. It seems too good to be true, but simply by creating one destination where every single thing is available, you will see more next steps. And then once you've done that, there's so much extra work that you can do on the margins. You can use social to point to more next steps. And you can use all of your digital communications to point to more next steps. But you need to have that central hub first. And so we built Nucleus to do all that.
So if somebody's ready to sign up for Nucleus, they want to find out some more information and check it out and figure out how they get started, what's their next step to check out Nucleus?
Well, we know that making this change isn't easy, and we don't want to present it to be like this easy switch. We're talking about literally changing paradigms. But when you're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years, there's two things that necessitates. One, there is an incredible amount of opportunity. It's like the gold rush. I built an entire company on the back of this with no business training, just because I understood the shift that we were living through. Your church can do the same. You can reach people in ways that you've never done by taking this opportunity. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's not easy, because it's a whole new world essentially. And so you have to kind of figure that out. We're here to help you figure that out. We know it's not easy, so we've got a 30-day free trial. You can test the entire Nucleus platform, test drive it. You don't even have to put in your credit card. You can just put in your email. There's no risk to you. Check it out. And if it's a good fit, great. And if not, that's okay too, because we know that this new paradigm is incredibly difficult. It's not going to be for everyone. For the brave pioneer churches that are willing to jump in and do it, we've seen amazing things, more life change, more next steps, which again is what it's all about. And that's how we judge everything that we do. So you can go to nucleus.church, sign up with your email, 30 free days. You'll get 30 free social posts, 30 days to our entire church website builder that is going to help you create your own central hub. And you can explore the platform. We have no contracts, no long-term commitments, cancel anytime. Again, we're trying to remove every barrier that we can to, allow this to happen. The cost of Nucleus, it's $99 a month for everything. There's no complicated calculators you have to enter. You're not going to be penalized if you're a bigger church that uses it more. And we even have scholarships available. So if you're a smaller church or a startup church, just let us know and we'll work with you to make Nucleus possible for you, because we want it to be accessible to every church.
Cool. Nucleus.church. And Brady, if somebody wants to connect with you specifically on social, which one is your favorite social platform?
Twitter's my favorite, to basically just keep up with sports. And I don't get too many messages on Twitter compared to Instagram. I'm at Brady Shearer on each. But if you DM me on Insta, tweet at me on Twitter, I'll do my very best to get back to you. I am very active personally on both of those platforms.
Well, Brady, thank you so much for hanging out today. Lots to think through. And I really appreciate your time and giving some insight on how we can change these 5 missteps in our church communications.
Thanks for having me, Adam. If I'll say one more thing, if you liked any of what we had to say, we do put out free content every single week, multiple times a week. You can go to youtube.com/prochurchtools. You can go to prochurchtools.com/podcast. If you're more of a podcast listener, you can watch on video, listen on the podcast, and we just hear me yell even more all the time. This is actually me holding back, believe it or not.
Right. Well, thanks for hanging out, Brady.
Thanks, Adam.
Hey, Tyler, just tell us a little bit about what the Engage conference is all about.
So the Engage conference is an online, completely free conference that we put together to help church leaders navigate the technology that is so necessary in today's world. But what we're finding is so many churches just lack the resources, the time, the energy, the money to be able to navigate all of the technology that's just so imperative for us to be able to reach people. And so we've brought some of the best minds in the church space and the technology space all coming together so that we can focus right around how do you implement technology inside the church so that you can reach more people in your community.
Perfect. Our listeners can sign up for free to the Engage conference at churchmarketingideas.com/engage. Thanks, Tyler.
So my pastor wants to post clips from his sermon on YouTube. What's the best way to figure out which keywords to include in the title of the clips so they show up in searches?
So this is a question that comes up quite often with our sermonclipper.com clients, because some churches have the package where they do their own uploads, and other churches, we look after that for them when we do their keyword research. And that's really what it comes down to. I know you're asking about keywords because you want to get the best possible search results when somebody's on YouTube looking for your video. So there's a couple ways you do this. The first thing that I would recommend doing is a tool called tubebuddy.com, and make sure we link that in the show notes. TubeBuddy will kind of do some of that research for you and let you know what keywords are most searched and most prevalent and most related to your topic. But if you're kind of in a DIY situation, then here's what I do. I go to Google and start typing in the topic or the theme of your clip. Now, what Google's going to do is it's going to populate what other people are searching when they search some of those keywords. So, it's going to drop down 5 or 6 options that are closely related to what you're asking. Choose one of those options that best resonates with the content of your clip, because if Google's suggesting it, people are actually searching for it. And we know that Google's the top search engine in the world, but YouTube is close second. And because Google owns YouTube, they like to put their YouTube content in the Google search results. So it's kind of a double whammy. Now, if you go to search in Google and you see that it's filling in words and it doesn't quite properly describe the topic of your video, then pick something that's close and scroll down to the bottom. You'll see Google has suggested related searches, and there's usually about 10 options there of things that are similar but not identical. And between what you see in the drop down in your Google search, and then once you actually do the search, scroll down to the bottom and you see about 10 related search ideas. There's quite a few ideas in there of things that people are actually searching that you can use as ideas to title your YouTube video so that it shows up in search results when people search those things. Thanks for the question. And if you're listening and you have a question, just go to churchmarketingideas.com and click the button that says Ask a Question. We'll make sure that we answer every single question that comes in, and some of them will even show up on our podcast. Coming up on the next episode.
So I started out in a church plant. I was on the leadership team of a church plant here in Kansas City. My older brother is a church planter out in California. And so this was, 7-8 years ago. But I can remember I was leaving a leadership meeting where we had spent, it felt like 2 hours mapping out the perfect way that we were going to follow up with all of our guests. And I'll never forget this. We had this marker board. It was, jam-packed with every step that we thought should be a part of this that we were not currently doing. And at the very end of the meeting, my pastor says, "Okay, so who's gonna lead this? Who's gonna be in charge?" And nobody raised their hand, including myself. And I left that meeting angry. I was truly mad that we knew we had a way that we could reach more people in our city, and no one was willing or could make time in their schedule. And I'm throwing stones at myself there too. And so I'm driving home from this meeting feeling frustrated, and I'm going on vacation the next morning, and I got a text message from Southwest Airlines telling me that my flight was delayed. So my immediate response is, now I'm really mad, right? Now my vacation's messed up as well. And then I had this, what I think is an epiphany moment of wait a minute, if Southwest Airlines can follow up with their passengers in this really brilliant way, why can't the church do the same thing? So I pick up the phone, I call my older brother, and I say, "Matt, I have the best idea ever. We're going to start to follow up with church guests the same way that Southwest Airlines does with passengers." And he says, "Tyler, that's the dumbest idea ever. That's not a one-to-one. The church is not doing passenger notifications. They're not grabbing a bullhorn and screaming out information. They're building real, authentic, true relationships." And he was completely right. But we kind of chewed on that concept for a while. And after a few months, we discovered that it was possible to get a local telephone number and not do it in such a robotic or spammy way, but instead have real conversation